Is it the opening salvo of a breakup of big tech or a loser case, as CNBC's Jim Cramer calls it? Well, we're about to find out. The U.S. Justice Department is suing Google, calling it a monopoly. And here to discuss what this means for investors, consumers, and for startups, Matt Lamons of Intelligence Factory. Matt, thanks for being here.
It's great to be here. Thank you very much.
So, Matt, at the heart of this lawsuit is really an argument that the DOJ is making that so many searches take place on Google. About 90% of them take place on Google, and 95% of searches online take place on Google on mobile devices. Here's part of the complaint I want you to react to. Quote, by using distribution agreements to lock up scale for itself and deny it to others, Google unlawfully maintains its monopolies. What does that really mean for consumers?
Well, what it means for consumers is they get the product that they want wherever they are at. So because their Google search is ubiquitous and pre-installed, they can automatically use the services that they're familiar with using. And in fact, that's one of the things that Google relies on, is that users don't uninstall or change the default settings.
Yeah, because I think the heart of this is really that so many Apple iPhones in particular have this pre-installed, as do Androids, and that makes up almost all of the market. I think it's 60-40 split, and people don't change it. But is that really a monopoly? I know that's a legal argument, but in terms of the technology, is that really a monopoly?
Well, and that's a great question, because the product is free. And normally, antitrust and monopolies are concerns for the government when the consumer is harmed. And so one of the questions would be, how does a consumer get harmed when they have the ability to participate and use a product that's free? But you look at 90% of the market is a huge amount of the market. It's virtually unheard of. And so it's very challenging. Yeah.
So here's what Google had to say. They say, quote, people use Google because they choose to, not because they're forced to or because they can't find alternatives. And they go on to make this argument. This lawsuit would do nothing to help consumers. To the contrary, it would artificially prop up lower quality search alternatives, raise phone prices, and make it harder for people to get the search services they want to use. First off, are there really any alternatives to Google? Really? I mean, we know Bing is out there. We know DuckDuckGo is out there, but who really uses them?
Not very many people. If you look at the statistics, Bing is used to a marginal extent. DuckDuckGo is at 2% of the market. So in effect, there isn't an alternative. There are alternatives. You can go find them. You can use them. They work reasonably well. The problem is that the scale, one of the things that Google talks about that's core to their product value is the scale of the data that they can bring to the product and the user experience. And that scale is because they're everywhere, and because of the pre-installs and the defaults that they have and the relationships they have with mobile phone manufacturers as well as the carriers. That scale is what gives them the competitive edge. And so in effect, if you go to Bing, if you go to DuckDuckGo, you're not getting as a consumer the value of all that scale of data. So in a way, no, there isn't a competitor to Google search because you don't get the same experience from these other competitors.
You know, Eric Schmidt, the former Google CEO and chairman, just weighed in with the Wall Street Journal earlier this week. He said, quote, it's bad public policy to use antitrust to regulate. He said, you're better off trying to figure out what regulations you want because you can actually pass them as laws through the political process. He says, antitrust is a very blunt instrument, and you can be sure that corporations will defend themselves as well as other corporations have. What do you make of that response? Not just the argument that antitrust is a blunt instrument, but that you really are better off setting the rules of the road legislatively.
I thought his comments were kind of funny because he talks about the realities of, there's 5 big tech companies that represent 20% of the U.S. stock market in terms of market cap. Talks about the complexity, the realities of the complexity of their ecosystem. It is very complex, and the concerns are, if you start tinkering with that, are you going to have some unintended consequences that are extraordinarily negative? But then he also doesn't address the actual substance of what the remedies that are being sought by the DOJ, and he starts pointing at boogeyman. So he starts pointing at the Republicans, he starts pointing at China, he starts pointing at social networks, and the content that's produced on platforms. And he doesn't talk at all obviously, about what the subject of the antitrust suit is. And so, in effect, he says, well, government should look at regulations and laws as a way of regulating, and he discounts the fact that antitrust law and statutes are a part of the statutes already. So they are applying the law that's in effect appropriate for this case.
So you work with a lot of startups, right? And there's already been some analysis by the startup community and by smaller companies about what this would mean to them. From a regulatory perspective, if there becomes more regulation, which is most assuredly coming down the pike, right? Like both parties want it. Some consumers want it, although not in droves. What are we looking at here in terms of the environment to come up with the next Google?
Yeah, and that's a really great question, because some of the things I've seen, especially in the Nadler's commission report on competition in digital markets, is one of the things they were thinking about is a possible remedy is the acquisition and killer acquisitions that Google has made in the past. And so
we should explain what that means briefly. Sure. That's the idea that Google just buys up its competition and then squashes it.
Yeah, and folds the talent into their current teams, but the technology never goes anywhere. Sometimes it may become a feature, and sometimes it doesn't. And it doesn't mean that every time they make an acquisition and something doesn't come of it means that it was nefarious and that was their plan originally, because technology is challenging and things evolve very quickly. So what they thought—
some of these ideas might sound better than they are when you actually buy the company too.
Yeah. And they may have bought something that was more hyperbole than reality. It's probably more the case that their ecosystem is very stable now. Incorporating new features and technologies is a long process. And so by the time that gets into the production cycle on the product path, that it may have been replaced by something else. But it is a fact that they have made acquisitions, they've parked the teams and the talents, and they never do anything with it. And that part is very antitrust. It's very aggressive business practices. For the startup community, one of the things that Google Ventures has done is provides an exit strategy or a place for startups to go to scale. And when done right, they can be incorporated and do very good work. So Google purchased in 2008 DoubleClick, and it was instrumental in their ability to serve up ads and their ad platform. And you say, well, that was a great acquisition by Google. It directly met their business model needs, and it was folded in and made a big difference for their ecosystem. But there are a lot of other startups that don't go anywhere. And so what that means is, in a personal level, some startup founders, they do very well. They get a nice payday. They get to rest a little bit, but what they wanted to do and the worlds they wanted to build, the technologies they wanted to build, they don't get that satisfaction, which is bad. But their hopes for that technology being an impact in consumers' lives or business environment isn't realized. And it's that unrealized positive impact that is the problem.
So you're talking about an argument that could easily also be applied to Amazon, to Microsoft, some of these other big companies. Microsoft's already weathered a storm on antitrust. But essentially, if we get the hands of technology sort of concentrated in, the sort of 26% of the S&P 500 that are all tech stocks, and they're going to just eat up any new idea, how do we prevent that from becoming, sort of hurting our ability to be competitive globally?
Yeah, and that's really the challenge. And if you look at, there's been some tech leaders, Peter Thiel, for example, talks about the lack of innovation in the last 10 years. He says there really isn't been the huge breakthroughs that we've seen in previous decades. And that's concerning to him. He's somebody that would probably know, right? So yeah. Google's done a phenomenal job. I mean, they've grown to a global company. They're making tons and tons of money. People are really happy with their services. But success also has a suppressive effect. And Google isn't looking to innovate. What they're looking to do is retain their position in the market and provide the services that they have better and better to the clients that they serve.
Yeah, so let me just move from consumers, which we've talked about at length, to advertisers and businesses, essentially. There are countless numbers of businesses in this country and others that use Google and rely heavily on its ability to reach people and customers, whether it's getting Google certified or SEO, SMO, all of these terms of art that marketing companies have and that small businesses have. The argument in the complaint is that basically because Google is the gatekeeper for so many consumers, that they're the only place that advertisers can go to get those kinds of eyeballs. Is that a fair assertion?
Yeah, I think that is. I think Google can't run away from how successful they are. And I don't think they should actually in the end of it, right? I don't know what the outcome of the suit will be, but I don't think it's a winning strategy for Google to say that they aren't a monopoly and they don't have the market share that they have. Because what you can do on Google is you can actually target ads for customers in the stage of the buying process that they're in. And that's really the crux of the value for Google Ads. So it's because Google is across platforms, they're across many different devices, and they have a model of the user. And that's also part of the privacy aspect. So Google's data allows targeted ads to be targeted not only to the types of things people want, but the types of messages and the types of information they need for the stage of the buying process or information inquiry that they're in. You can't get that anywhere else. You can't get that in print media. You can't get that on radio, TV. It's only in the digital platform and truly only in Google Ads. I don't see it in effectively anywhere else.
So what happens to all these businesses if Google gets broken up?
Well, it's a great question. I think, and that's really the concern. And in reading the filing from the DOJ, if you look at their remedy section, you didn't hear that, oh, Google's going to get broken up. What you heard was a general statement for what the remedy would be to fix the business practices that are.
Yeah, but that doesn't seem possible. Those business practices are what makes Google successful. You can't take the Google out of Google. Then It's not Google anymore.
Then it's not Google anymore. Right. And so I don't know. So if you say, well, if a thought experiment, if Google were broken up, can all these parts of the ecosystem work the way that they did when Google was all together? And I don't think so. And so, am I happy that advertisers probably have to pay more because Google is self-dealing? Google has ads and they place those ads above what other organic searches are? No. Does it cost more because Google is not only the maintainer and the organizer of the platform, and they also are a client of the platform because they have Google products and services as well? No, it is an extra cost in that ecosystem. But I don't think splitting up Google is the right way to go either.
What do you think needs to be done that could make sort of both masters happy, the consumers and the businesses that use Google?
I think the prescription could be a better visibility from the consumer's point of view of the information that they're receiving. Years ago, we used to have organic search. And so you had first page and you had what was really out there on the web. Now what you see a shortened list that Google thinks is what you really want. So Google is more of a find engine than a search engine. Google presents you the information that you're really looking for, and half the time you don't click any farther. And so you're finding what you're really wanting, which is awesome.
Google says that's part of the monopoly, you would argue.
That's part of the monopoly. And that's part of the pushback from advertisers and end retailers, because they're not getting the click through because Google is just answering their question.
You would argue that instead of having people just stay in the Google universe for the answer to the question, that Google once again connect them to the results of their search.
I would, if I'm on the retailer side, yes, that's what I want. I want them. It's all about who controls the transaction, and Google wants to control the transaction. They would control the clicks. They would control the eyeballs. And when they're outside the Google universe, they no longer have control of that.
I know we're not going to solve this overnight or even in one interview, Matt Lamons, but it is interesting to think about the breakup of big tech, kind of starting with this and see where it heads now. I know that you'll be watching it, and most importantly, its impact on the future of innovation in this country. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
You can also find us on YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Thanks for watching. I'm Jessica Stone.